Hey everybody, welcome back. In this film here I want to talk about color use, and very specifically we're going to be talking about using an image editor. In this case I'm going to be using Photoshop. You certainly don't have to use Photoshop. Most good image editors will allow you to do the kinds of things we're talking about in this particular episode. But first of all I want to talk about making graphics for the web, and just a couple guidelines you're going to need to kind of consider and keep in mind as you're working on this. First off, right away is you need to make sure you're working in an RGB color space. Now, how would I know if I'm working in an RGB color space? Well, it's real easy. Up at the top, what you're going to do is you're going to see a menu here, and it's going to be the same on Windows here, but if you go into the image window here and you select mode and the dropout window comes out, you can see right now that I am not in an RGB color space. Let me show you. Right now, see, I can see CMYK color is checked and 8-bit. So right now I'm viewing everything in 8-bit CMYK. Okay, now 8-bit is perfectly acceptable right now, but CMYK is not. CMYK is optimized for print. CMYK it's kind of an acronym representing the color of inks you're going to use in print, being cyan, magenta, yellow, and K stands for black somehow. But anyway, what I want to do is I want to be in an RGB color space, which is the color that radiates off the monitor. So I'm going to select RGB. Also stands for red, green, and blue. Let's go ahead and select that. Now, here's the deal. When you change modes, it's always best to try and start out in the mode you're going to be in, because what it wants to do is flatten the image or merge everything. I'm going to go ahead and merge these right now, and we'll just go ahead for this our sake now. It is going to flatten the image, but it's okay. And you might see a slight color shift, and don't worry about that now because we didn't start out in a CMYK color space, and that was a bit problematic. But right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little logo here, and let's say that this background green here I really want to carry out as a major color in my web page. I want to be able to list its hexadecimal value in the style sheet, things like that. Well, how do I find that out? Okay, over here on your tool palette here for a second, I want to point out a couple tools that you're going to find very useful. Okay. First of all, we're going to select the eyedropper tool. And before I get to work on anything, I want you to notice two things down here. There's two boxes representing two colors here. You can kind of think of it as having two colors in memory. In Illustrator, it represents stroke and fill. In Photoshop, it represents foreground and background. We're really not using either foreground or background right now, but what I want to do is be able to sample my color and work with one of these two colors on my palette. So I've got the eyedropper tool selected. Let's move over to the image, and I'm just going to basically hover over the green. You could do this in a photograph if you wanted to, but we're going to sample the color. So I'm going to simply click there, and then come down here, and you'll notice that on our little color palette, the black has now changed to my green. Okay, so there's a couple places you can look for this. Let's go ahead and double click on the green here. I'm going to open up the color picker. Okay, now what this is going to allow me to do is continue to change the color further if I want to edit the color I'm using. Don't worry about that right now. Let's say this is the green we've decided on. And what I want you to look at here is it gives you translations into several different color spaces here, okay? And you know, these are for the most part pretty accurate. You are going to see some differences going back and forth between color spaces simply because you are changing the color space. But what you can see is HSB, and here's some percentages for that. And below that you see your RGB values. So this is going to be, you know, 92 red, 140 green, and 47 blue, excuse me. So you can see that it actually has a little bit of red and a little bit of blue in it, but it is predominantly green. But this particular shade has some other values in it. Here's your lab color space over here, and then finally the CMYK color values. And then last but not least, down here on the bottom left, you're going to see this little number sign followed by 6 digits. Well, this is your hexadecimal color value. Okay, so if I want to sample this green and use it in my web page, this is it. And you can actually select, and then you can use Command-C to copy on the Mac, or Control-C on the PC, and then you can go paste it into your style sheet. So this is a great way of using Photoshop to select your colors, but that's where your color value is going to be. Okay, and so basically what you want to remember is you want to use your RGB color space. You want to make sure you're there, otherwise you're going to have some problems with some inconsistencies. There's one more thing I want to talk about in Photoshop. Let's say for a second that you have this great logo, and what you want to do is you're going to save this out as an image, but you want it to be on a background, and that background is going to be that same green, so it's going to be seamless. You don't notice that the logo is actually a little cutout graphic there, but you're using CSS to render the background. Well, there's a really easy way to control this. But what they don't tell you is the way Photoshop ships is that it's actually set up for all kinds of uses for print and using printers and stuff like that. And they're real big on an SGB color space. And a lot of times you can experience shifts in Photoshop. Like you have your color just right in here, you double check your hexadecimal value, you've got that correct, but still you got a slightly different shade green in your graphic. Well, let me show you how to fix this color shift, okay? It always helps to calibrate your monitor, obviously, because you want to maintain some kind of consistency. But beyond that, there's a little hidden thing in here that Adobe doesn't like to tell you about for whatever reason, and this vexed me for weeks until I was able to find out why. Normally when we save graphics out to the web, what you're going to do is go into the File menu up at the top of the screen, and you're going to go down and you're going to select Save for Web and Devices, okay? And then there's a hotkey combination here, and it's going to be Option Shift Command S if you want to do a shortcut. But let's go ahead and select that. And when one selects that, you come up with this massive preview pane here. And I'll show you what's going on. You're going to see, if you've never used this before, the original image and what it looks like on the left-hand side, and then the preview on the right-hand side. So you can experiment with the level of compression that you want to use, the type of graphic you want to save it out, and just to make sure that everything is looking good. And for a flat image like this that uses just a lot of vector line art type, probably don't want to do a JPEG. And as you can see down here at the bottom, it tells you what the target size of this image once it saves out is going to be, which is going to be 5K, which is really not that big. It'll take 3 seconds to download on a 28.8 modem. And that's very slow connection, and those people are in the minority these days, but you might be taking that into consideration for your project. But let's say that I want to maybe maximize that a little better, get it smaller. I've got a lot of images on my page. Every little bit helps. Let's go over here under Preset. I'm going to select, let's select GIF, okay? And here's the GIF preset. And what it does is it basically is going to map to a color table, and it compresses slightly different than a JPEG image does, and we'll talk about this more later. But as you can see now, I've got it down to 21.9K. 21.95K. So anyway, so it is a little bit smaller, and I can see that it looks pretty good. I don't see a lot of artifacts in the compression here. Everything looks pretty smooth. My color looks good. Everything's good to go. Okay, well, normally what you want to do is go ahead and hit save, tell it where to go, and work from there. But there's where you're missing the step. You're going to get a color shift if you don't do the following. Right here next to the preset, there's a little tiny arrow. It says Optimize Menu, and when I click on that, there's a little drop-down box that comes up. Okay, now typically the way Photoshop ships and installs on your computer, this little thing where it says Convert to sRGB, that is checked by default. I just turned mine on, so when I go back I can see there's a check mark by it. I don't want that, okay? And let me pull back out here so you can see. Can you see the color shift now? There's a difference between the logo on the left and the logo on the right. The green is washed out, and what it's doing is it's converting it to the sRGB color space, which is fine if you're working for photographs, and it certainly has plenty of applications. I'm not saying that it's completely invalid, but you don't want it for doing web graphics. So make sure you deselect that, okay? And now you can see that the color has not shifted. Now when I save out, I can put this on the correct hexadecimal value background, and it'll be seamless. You won't notice the graphic being a smaller box. It'll look fluid with the page. So anyway, I hope that was helpful, and it's a first little movie here on using Photoshop for web graphics. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You're going to need something, because unless you memorize several million hexadecimal values in your head, color becomes very difficult. So move on from there, and there you go.